Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Connected Educator Cafe. It is Monday, the 21st of October, and Milton, Chen, and Sam Chaltain are our guests. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And everybody, you lost your...
Hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm in a Starbucks, so it's a little noisy, but I hope you can hear me and see me. There we go.
There you go. Okay, well, you're going to need to turn that audio off when you're not talking because it creates a lot of background noise, but it's fine when you are. Okay, so this is really a lot of fun. There's so much going on for Connected Educator Month. I don't know if Mark Sylvester is probably still in the room, or he will be coming back. There's Mark. Anyway, the creator of Ed Connector. So please do go visit Ed Connector and see if you can make connections with folks there. The book clubs, I think, Invent to Learn starts tonight, about a half an hour after our show finishes, the book group on that. There is a badge for tonight's event. So if you wait until the end of the event, there'll be a slide with the badge code. And there's lots more. There's just an incredible number of activities taking place, including we finished this weekend our 40-hour marathon, the Future of Libraries Conference, which was just phenomenal. Again, if I thought I had connected fatigue last week, I have it in spades this week. You can see the end of the tunnel. This is a chance for those of you who are participating live to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. Click on the star icon and click on the map. I've loved this format. So, and put your location in the chat if you would. That's awfully fun for people. I love this conversation format, and I like it so much that over the weekend I bought the domain name greatconversations.org. There's something about bringing people together in conversation that has really been fun, and I expect we'll see more of that tonight. And think out loud with me, if you would, about how to do this on a regular basis, because I think the conversations here have been just brilliant. So we're going to move forward here, but keep putting those locations in the chat. Okay, Hong Kong, you make us international. We appreciate it. Okay, so this is kind of a fun format. What we'll do is we'll ask each of you, Milton and Sam, to give a sort of short historical overview, kind of how you got to where you are right now, the things that have been important up until this point in time in your life. We're going to give you a chance in a little bit to kind of drill down on something you're passionately interested in at the time. But the goal here is to get a sense of kind of what has brought you to where you are. And Milton, okay to start with you? And I'm seeing an audio slowdown from Milton. And unfortunately, he may have escaped to a Starbucks only to have encountered a connection issue. So if we don't hear from him in the next 15 seconds, I think we'll switch to Sam and have Sam give the history first. So Sam, Milton's a little missing in action right now. Can you do that for us? Can you give us the 5-minute Sam story?
You bet. And just to check, you can you hear me fine, Steve?
Yes, absolutely. And it looks like Milton dropped off, which is kind of a common thing when someone's bandwidth gets low. So he'll probably come back. And if you see him in the chat and I've missed him, help remind me to upgrade him to a moderator. Okay, go ahead, Sam.
So hi, everybody. 5 minutes. I'll try to do it in less than that. I'm Sam. I live in D.C., born in New Hampshire, father of 2, lifelong educator. Started teaching in the public and private school systems of New York City, and I did that for 5 years, and first moved to D.C. about 14 years ago to become the director of a national network of schools, the First Amendment Schools Project, which, as Steve knows, was a key point in my own kind of personal and professional development, because it was the first opportunity I had to start working in and with lots of different schools and getting to know lots of different communities around the country and starting to see patterns of what worked, what didn't, what united us, what continued to divide us. And because it's only the 5-minute version, I would say skip ahead to the more recent past. And for the past 5 or 6 years, I've basically been out on my own. I'm increasingly described by other people as a journalist, so I still don't refer to myself as that, but I think that's happening because more and more my main work is, to some degree, bearing witness to the good stuff that's already happening when it comes to teaching and learning, and trying to identify stories, platforms, campaigns, ideas for identifying, telling, and then amplifying those stories, with the hope of helping the greatest number of people really understand what healthy teaching and learning looks like and requires. And so any way that I can do that, that's really where I see my work currently. It's certainly what I want to keep doing, and the challenge, as always, is just figuring out the way to make that happen. But knock on tables, so far so good. And the last thing I will say is I'm so glad that I was able to actually make the start of this, because I just put my oldest son to bed, and he may be wandering downstairs at any moment. But so far so good. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, and if he does come wandering down, it's still good. Don't worry about it. We'll find a way to make that a part of our conversation. Okay, before we leave you, Sam, I ran the Library 2.013 conference over the weekend. 160 sessions on the future of libraries. Many in here probably were helpers or volunteers. It occurred to me that the story we've told of libraries is changing dramatically, right? So you have the root word for book and the word library. You have this sort of story of what a library does. And the news stories for libraries are really, really varied. In fact, they're so varied, you almost wonder if they really should be a part of the same story. You have library as makerspace, you have library as information hub, you have library as community center. Okay, so if there's validity in asking the question, are the news stories about libraries going to be the same? You good there? If the news stories about libraries...
Go ahead.
No, you're good. Do we ask the same question about schools? At some point, are the stories about schools going to become fragmented enough that we're actually going to look for separate categorizations? Or is schooling still kind of one big story?
That's a typically great Steve question. And I would say what is largely still currently true is that the story of learning is still primarily seen through the prism of the story of school. And that will only continue as a monopoly for so long, because there are people like Monica Hardy out there who are not only pushing the rest of us to think about a different way of organizing people and learning. And for those people that don't know Monica's work, I'm sure somebody can share it for me in the chat, but Monica's doing a lot of thinking about the notion of scaling the individual and the idea of the city as the school. And I think it's just a matter of time before the notion that school is where the learning occurs, which of course hasn't even necessarily always been true, will get replaced by the question, when and where and how is the learning occurring? as to when we really make that shift so that a significant percentage of stories in the zeitgeist are that kind of boundless, I don't know. I think we're just at the earliest stages of shifting to that very brave new world. And so I think that the brick and mortar foundation of how we think about learning is going to stick for a while. But I'd love to hear what other people think.
Okay, we'll save that for the more in-depth if it comes up. Milton, we're glad to have you back, or we were glad to have him back. I think we've lost him again. Yikes. The poor guy. That has got to be frustrating. I know he left his house to get a better connection at Starbucks, and he's probably stressing out right now. Let's hope he doesn't
I think
about it.
The fact that even during Connected Educator Month and the Connected Cafe, the fact that we are experiencing connection issues speaks to the fact that we are both in this brave new world and still very much in the kind of earliest birth pangs of it.
I like that. Okay, so in the absence of Milton for a second here, let's play a little bit with that idea. So Monica's here, and Monica, I don't know if you're willing to take the microphone or how you'd like to participate, but I'm going to give you the privileges to take the mic if you would like. And maybe let's have Monica quickly describe kind of her vision. And then I have a question. So Monica, are you up for that? Click on the talk button at the top left. Monica, you're looking for the button that says talk. It's underneath the image of Sam. And when you click on it, we'll turn your microphone on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the vision, and it comes from multiple people, particularly youth, over the last 5 years, is that to get at equity, especially in a more timely manner, what if the city was the school? And much like a utopian university campus, the resources are free to everyone as public education defined that public is for everyone. That's the short version.
Okay, so is there a way to give us a sort of a fuller sense of what that might look like?
As far as what it looks like in a city, or as far as the sustainability of it, like the funding of it?
I guess I'm thinking more of what it would look like in a city. I'm thinking of Kieran Biersetti, you know, who closes like streets down and tries to have, you know, the whole city be involved in the learning, or is every place in the city a place where students are comfortable participating in the learning? What would it kind of look like?
Well, obviously different, I don't even know if they would be called levels, but different degrees as it kind of grows into school is just life. So initially, the vision that they framed was as people are moving into city spaces that have been crowdsourced, like libraries, maker spaces, that we go in and we redefine and restructure existing buildings. So high school buildings could maybe look more like U-Media centers. Middle school buildings would look more like maker spaces. And then grade school buildings would look more like Mission Hill or Sudbury schools. But the vision, the ultimate vision would be that those spaces would just be available. We wouldn't even label them, that life is just happening, and we aren't even worried about credentialing. So just you wake up every day and what you're very curious about technology can help us connect to people in the city so that, every day you're connected to maybe 5 people that are curious about the same things. And so you meet up in these spaces that have been provided and the resources that have been provided through government funding that is now upcycled or reallocated. And that's the sustainability of it. Or, perhaps because we have this new founding, we just have developed a completely new economy. But the ultimate vision is that the whole city is just chaotic by design, and it's just a space that's free.
So that's a little bit different than, like one of the things I keep thinking about is this comparison between how we're served food, right? So there are a variety of places that we can go for food. There's food prepared in different ways. There's food at different stages. There's the sort of diversity of ways of getting food. But that kind of gives this sense of there's some commercial aspect to it, or people who are doing it, or profitability, or supplying it. Yours sounds a little bit more like it's still government funded, it's just more integrated into everything else that takes place.
Well, honestly, personally, I think the government funding would just be transitional unless it wasn't accepted that way. I just see this happening regardless if that happens. Bucky, what's his last name? Everyone knows him as Bucky, has a quote that he says that today one person should be able to fund 10,000 people. And so, yeah, some people will get actual money, perhaps, but we'll do more time, talent, share. And so we'll start, the whole idea of earning a living will start to diminish. But yeah, community kitchens, farmers markets. Yeah, Buckminster Fuller.
Okay.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Can I add a wrinkle based on this conversation for this group to consider, because it's like the main thing that I've been wrestling with?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll try to be as quick as possible in setting the context and then see what people think about this. So what Monica is describing is a very different type of organizing of people and a very different kind of set of assumptions guiding what people need in order to thrive. And I just finished a book about school choice in D.C. It's coming out in the spring. I spent a whole year in 2 schools, and I've been thinking a lot about, and my goal of the book, which is not really related to the question, but just by way of context, was to put a human face on the modern landscape of school choice. So what does it really look like to be a teacher in a city like Washington, D.C.? And what does it look like to be a parent basically shopping for a school? Because this is also a very brave new world. So I just read this book by a Harvard professor named Michael Sandel called What Money Can't Buy, and it's about the moral limits of markets. And so the thing I want to tee up is he makes the observation that what has happened in society in general is that without ever quite realizing it, we have shifted from having a market economy to being a market society, where in effect everything, including in this example public education, is a commodity, is for sale. And his point is, and he's not really even thinking about education, sometimes market-based thinking works well, sometimes it doesn't. The reason I thought of it with regard to Monica's is what Monica is describing is in effect the antithesis of market-based thinking. And so what I'm struggling with is, I support school choice in its kind of purest concept, but I worry about it, and I worry about the move towards us becoming much more market-oriented in how we think and consume everything. And so particularly for this group of people, I'm just wondering, when we hear what Monica's describing, when we look at what's happening in cities around the country right now, what are other people thinking and seeing when it comes down to this this question of, what is going to be the moral center of how we organize ourselves, let alone what's at the center of our schools.
Hi, it's Milton. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. And Milton, I'm going to give you a choice. You can either respond to that, and we'll keep the conversation going and do your intro later, or if you'd like, we can take a pause, have you get a little bit of your background, and then we'll come back to that question. But it's up to you.
Hey, how about if I do both at once? I just put in I just put in a comment that I wonder whether some of this new, sometimes called sharing economy, where people are trying to rebel against everything being commodified and markets for everything are beginning to come back and share without thinking about, am I going to get paid for this? So you see that happening with community gardens. You see that happening with Lyft ride sharing, ways, and there's ways in which people are sharing. If you need a tool, they go online and you need something to, you need a lawnmower. You can find someone who will let you borrow their lawnmower in your community. And I'm just wondering whether some of that, more of that could come to education. Certainly young people are finding mentors and experiences online that they're not having to pay for. We just interviewed a bunch of folks, and this is one thing I'm involved with. At the Institute for the Future, we're involved in an Extreme Learners program, trying to build out a future of learning activity where we're helping people envision ways in which learners can now go beyond what their schools are providing. If you have a great school, that's great, a couple of great teachers, but if you don't, are there ways in which you can self-organize your own learning? So I'm spending some time at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto.
So Milton, I think we have models for that, right? Like we have open spaces in cities that are built specifically as sort of infrastructure or the conditions for certain activities to take place. You build a park knowing you're not going to define every activity that takes place in the park, but people will use the park for a variety of purposes. Is it that kind of a vision, or do you think it's more people will just sort of volunteer on their own and come together on their own, or do you need the infrastructure sort of investment?
Well, I think it's still early days, but I think it takes pioneering folks like who are on this on this very connected cafe to think more about how to make this possible. I think you only have to look at the maker movement to see, wow, there's a ways in which people are coming together, making things together, and not worrying too much about who's paying for what. I'll just give you one example. There's a fellow named Mark Roth, who's a homeless fellow here in San Francisco. He's not the stereotype of a homeless person. He has a lot of skills, and he has a background as an engineer. But a lot of people, certainly in this economy, are just one paycheck away from being homeless. So Mark has started a live workspace for homeless folks in San Francisco. If you can qualify and you apply, you get to come and live in a couple of shipping containers that he's been able to purchase, and then also learn some skills around 3D printing, around computer programming. It's just one example of ways in which these educational learning spaces are cropping up in different places.
Sam, you want to riff on that at all?
I'd love to cede my time and get another voice in to riff on it if it's possible, if we can do that.
We can do anything we want. We've got about 5 minutes before we have a mandatory break for Tom DeBoer to tell us about tomorrow's activities. So in that 5 minutes, I'm going to give everybody the microphone. It's easiest if you raise your hand so that we can kind of go sequentially. But if somebody would like to talk about this or add something or ask a question, let's go down that path for a couple of minutes. So while we're waiting, the food restaurant model, even though it is a market-based model, feels like one people would be sort of naturally comfortable with. Is there a reason why we might feel uncomfortable with that as a model?
I don't know. The first thing that pops up into my head, I know that this is, it's like from the after ecstasy, the laundry. This is the laundry when it comes to thinking about all of this. But, the two little boys that are sleeping upstairs, when it comes to thinking about major structural changes to learning, that's a big issue that, for me, like when I hear the food restaurant model, it's like we haven't cracked that nut yet of, yes, we want to make learning more personalized and customized. Yes, learning should be and already is something that happens anywhere and everywhere. And yes, until we really create a different type of societal structure, the big people have to work during the day and the little people have to go somewhere. So that's a sticking point for me as I try to think through the more radical possibilities of all of this.
Okay, let's see, we had a couple of comments. Milton made a reference to Marina Gorbis and her book, The Nature of the Future. Monica put in some links to her Redefined School site. Rhonda says, when we provide learning spaces, we're usually providing more than just desks. What would be our biggest challenge in open learning spaces that don't provide those resources? And Gordon asks, what is the age level of meaningful knowing for choice? Okay, before we take the break, Milton, responses to any of those questions or additional thoughts? And Milton, we don't have audio from you, so maybe your mic is off.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. I'm Blackboard Collaborate challenged. So it may seem like that the world of schools is kind of stuck in bureaucracy and mired in a lot of old issues of politics. So I do think we're going to get a lot of help from higher education, because at least in higher education you do have a marketplace. Students do have to pay to go to our illustrious universities, and there's a lot of disruption going on there very quickly in the past year or two with the MOOCs. So as universities begin to examine how they deliver higher education and at what cost, I think a lot of those changes in that thinking will come to schools. It's happening very quickly, and I think that's a good thing. As universities generally model education for K-12, and the more they begin to move to more hybrid models, more online models, lower the cost, are open to more innovation. Who would have thought that the innovation would come to universities first, but it is happening.
Okay, good place to pause. Tom DeBoer is here. Tom's going to give us an overview of what's taking place during Connected Educator Month tomorrow. It gives us all a couple minutes to breathe and think, and then we'll come right back to this conversation. Tom? And we're having a night of audio challenges. You in the audience may not be able to see this, but Tom's getting an indicator next to his name that says his audio is slowed down, so he may be in a similar circumstance. We'll wait a couple of seconds for him. Okay, Gordon, while we're waiting, why don't you make a quick note in the chat there about, I think the Invent to Learn book club starts at 9 Eastern tonight, and so that's a half hour after we close.
You guys hear me?
And oh, there you go.
Hello?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, you're live, Tom.
Okay, that's great. I guess, yeah, the book club is coming up at 9 o'clock. Tomorrow, some of the things that are happening, and by the way, hi Milton, a long time since we last got a chance to talk. Great to see you here tonight. I guess tomorrow's events, We've got Tech and Learning appearing at 2 o'clock with an event on what standards and assessments mean for college and career readiness. 2:30, Data Quality Campaign has its first event, which is a very important issue, Education, Data Privacy, and Security, which will feature panelists from New York State, State of Oklahoma, and the Council of Chief State School Officers. And I think that's the first big event that we've had on that subject, data privacy and security. At 5, we've got Adobe's Creative Classroom Activities CM series continuing with an event on e-learning. As always, the Adobe events feature 2 highly creative teachers, different from week to week, talking about their projects and their activities. This week they're talking about projects beyond the school walls. And coincidentally, at 5:15, COSN's got an event on connecting outside the classroom too, featuring 3 educators from Irving, Texas. At 5:30 tomorrow, we've got the fast-growing group Learn Zillion. I was just looking at their charts. They're growing like weeds out there, and they are in the house for the first time with a discussion on how to create impactful teacher-led collaborative professional development from teachers and coaches. At the same time, the Oberkotter Foundation debuts with its first webinar discussion titled Lend Me Your Ears, which is a discussion of professional learning to deliver extraordinary outcomes for kids 0 to 5 years old who are deaf or hard of hearing. NSTA is in the house again at 6:30 with their series, a continuation of their series about next generation science standards, core ideas, and the core ideas they'll be talking about tomorrow are motion and stability, forces and interactions. And then at 7:30 we have a very packed Connected Cafe with Julie Lindsay, Kathy Schrock, Shannon Miller, and Esther Wozicki. And at 9 o'clock, PLP, Powerful Learning Practice, has an open house, which if you've never been to a PLP open house, they do it right in terms of really showing you around their place and making sure you really take in everything that's going on with their company and their website. I guess the other thing I would say is, you know, as we head into the second half of the month, or we're sort of well into it now, I mean, we're trying to focus more and more on co-creation and building and making things together. We launched over the weekend a menu that collects together all the contests, challenges, and collaborative projects that people have launched during the course of this month, and we're encouraging people to add to that. We're going to be adding some contests and collaborative projects over the next 2 weeks, and you might think, well, you're not going to get them done in the next 2 weeks, and that's right, we're not going to get them done. CEM this year, sort of one of our mottos is that this is the beginning, not an end in itself, and we're going to be launching some. We thought that for the first half of the month was really good for sort of getting to know each other, getting up to speed on what's going on. Sort of didn't make a whole lot of sense to focus on co-creation right out of the get-go with all the stuff going on. But as we go to the second half of the month and beyond, we're encouraging people to put things on the calendar that go beyond the 31st, that allow us to work together and continue to collaborate to make this a more meaningful experience and be able to answer that question at the end of the month, well, what happens next? Well, a lot's going to be happening next. A lot of stuff is still going to be going on, and a lot of it's going to be collaborative, and we're really looking forward to rolling up sleeves with everybody and building some great connected education materials and services for everybody in the course of the next month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, and beyond. That's my update.
Thank you, Tom. Always a pleasure to have you here. Appreciate the update. Feel free to stick around, or also feel free to bump off. I know you're in your own world of fatigue and probably deserve some time with your family. Okay, so Milton, I want to sort of move back to your question about higher ed. So, with the good graces of my wife and 15-year-old daughter, we moved to Black Mountain, North Carolina this year to be part of a Sugata Mitra Soul, so self-organized learning environment. So this is a group that's a nonprofit group that's created a place with a food service and dorms, but no accredited curriculum. So kids can come and they can be doing a gap year, or they can do an online degree program, but they don't actually have a curricular program at this, what used to be an actual college. And in fact, there's a Buckminster Fuller connection here. I love this idea. I think it's really, really intriguing. We're only a few months into kind of my watching it, but my current perception is that most of these young people are completely unprepared to actually be self-directing. It's the exception rather than the rule that they kind of know what to do. And the organizers are struggling to figure out how to help create scaffolded steps for them to get into being independent. Is this sort of one of the big issues, which is you can't really, you can only push that horse so far and so hard. We can have big ideas about what happens in education, but are the students ready?
It's a really good set of questions. And I'm glad to hear you mention Black Mountain because that's, of course, the home of Black Mountain College, which I hope our group today will find out more about. That Buckminster Fuller was, that's twice we've mentioned Bucky Fuller today. That's terrific. But I just quickly want to say that Ruth Asawa is one of our most distinguished artists and sculptors, and she just passed away last year. The School of the Arts in San Francisco is named after Ruth Asawa, and she was a student there at Black Mountain College. She went there, would have been in the 50s, when she, after internment, she was interned as a Japanese American, and then she was able to go to college there and study with Bucky Fuller, and it's a great place to be launching these new ideas, so there's a lot of legacy there. But yeah, you're so right, Steve, that students don't automatically know how to self-organize their learning. It reminds me a lot of project-based learning, where high school students in particular, when they're asked to do in-depth projects, are really kind of at a loss. So they need experience doing this. The earlier, the better. But I believe they can catch on pretty quickly. I mentioned we had done some interviews with what we're calling extreme learners at the Institute for the Future. These are all folks 18 to 50 who are self-organizing their learning. There's so much available on the internet, but these students need that kind of experience, and it'd be interesting to think about how would you create a course, a MOOC perhaps, to help students get the resources and think about themselves as self-directed learners. But I'll just pause there and love to hear comments from others.
Yeah, and I'll respond to that because I think this is a really interesting topic, and as well invite anybody who wants to raise your hand to take the mic or make a comment. So Milton, I keep thinking about this camp that my daughters have gone to, a summer camp up in the mountains of Idaho, where the first day they're taken into a wood shop with all kinds of high-powered machinery, and they actually build something that they never would have imagined they were capable of building. And so they actually produce some outcome. And the idea is to kind of shift their whole mindset from the beginning of this camp that they're much more capable of doing things they want to do, and rather than sitting around and talking about it, they actually do it. It seems like maybe there's a clue there as well, right? I mean, we can have MOOCs, we can have other things, but it's almost like we have to find ways in which for them to be actually immediately productive and producing and creating and participating rather than just kind of another class. Does that make any sense?
I think that makes a ton of sense. But I think one of the first things that students should do when they're part of these self-directed learning environments is to actually make something. It's kind of ironic, but now the ability to use your hands to build and make, what people used to do in the 19th century, is becoming even more of a skill. I have a colleague, a young teacher, who's teaches middle school boys, and the first thing they do in September is the boys make their own desks. They've never done anything like that before, but it's a great way to start. At the Institute for the Future, we've sometimes referred to this movement to bring back maker skills and making. We mentioned food. What about growing your own food and making your own food? The Edible Schoolyard Project here in Berkeley. We sometimes refer to this as Amish 2.0. Bringing back all those skills to be able to be more self-sufficient, not just in your own learning, but also knowing how to make and build things.
Love that Amish 2.0. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm just wondering if anybody else sees a subtle distinction between what we were first talking about, which was self-directed learning, and what we're now talking about, which is hands-on experiential learning. And I'm not suggesting that they're mutually exclusive, but I am suggesting and really asking the group that to me those aren't quite the same thing. It's not the exact, they're not synonyms for each other. Like, and one of the things that I've always worried about is, for me, the ultimate goal is to give all people opportunities to experience learning environments that are experiential, challenging, engaging, relevant, and supportive. And in order to do those things, particularly in order to do the experiential and the relevant and the engaging part, there's a large degree of individual interest driving the work. But I'm just thinking of Paulo Freire's point, which I've talked about in the past, maybe even with you, Steve, that the distinction he makes between adults behaving in an authoritarian fashion, which is obviously not a good strategy, and adults abdicating their responsibility to be authoritative facilitators of learning, which I always worry if we romanticize self-direction too much, we can remove ourselves from the equation. And by ourselves, really here, I just mean the person that's in the position of serving as a teacher, a guide, or a mentor. It's not about what I know, pouring it into you, but it's not also, in my mind, just about you being left to your own devices to see what you discover. It's that you've got to have just the right blend of both. I don't know. What do other people think about that?
If you want to grab the mic, feel free to raise your virtual hand. It's the third hand over. Or you can put a note in the chat. Gordon says, Sam, it seems the hands-on, in a sense, is a way to remind a young person of their innate capabilities, often overlooked or not realized in a highly managed life. I guess what I was getting at a little is, what I'm seeing in these students is a fair amount of putting the pencils in the right places, getting everything sharpened, stacking the books, putting the note paper at the right spot of the desk, but not really kind of knowing how to engage. And I see that as a sort of a very practical issue, right? And that throwing them into the wood shop for that first day was a very managed experience, right? It was very intentional activity in order to help people get past that sense of inaction. And I'm wondering, my question was, to what degree is that going to be needed to be helpful? I think that actually kind of matches what you said. Okay, so I'm going to ask Sam a hard question, or one I think is hard, right? So, Sam and I have had long talks about democracy, about schools. So one of the dangers of kind of the liberal mindset is wanting something to happen badly enough that we're willing to do it without going through a democratic process. So to what degree are the visions that we sort of create for what cities would look like, what schools would look like, to what degree can we imagine those and then sort of create them and superimpose them? And to what degree do we just have to kind of allow things to take place?
So I don't think ultimately what we are talking about is less democracy and more biology. So it's not really even a choice. I mean, if what you want is compliance for something, then you can just insist that people do it. If what you want is commitment, then people have to have the space to enroll. Every great learning environment, whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a school that I've ever had the privilege of visiting, recognizes that the connective tissue is a high trust, high transparency environment where all people feel they have value. Now, I've been in some of those places where the way they define that and create that is everybody has a voice and an equal vote. And to me here, to your point, Steve, I think there's lots of different ways you can slice that. And then, but in other places, kids may not be as active in the governance of the school, but are very active kind of co-creators of their own learning. So, I mean, to me, if you want people to be excited about something, you have to give them the space to opt in. But am I right that the gist of your question was not primarily organizational, but just thinking about how do you seed an idea and make it spread?
I think it was the latter, right, which is, we can have visions for the role of schools and societies, but to some degree, like with the libraries, the legacy of schooling was an imposed legacy. So if you actually think about kind of how we get to the next stage, is it a vision that a certain few, like the Common Core, or a certain few created, and then there's this expectation of being mandated? Or do we think of kind of a natural evolution of different solutions coming out of society that rather than being mandated actually kind of become popular and become the norm? So from a larger governance standpoint, to what degree do we think we're going to kind of manage the new schooling, and to what degree does it evolve?
I'll share really quickly 2 design principles and then let other people play in. And Steve, we've talked about this before. The first is, I think that the central design principle that applies to everything is that simple structures lead to complex thinking, and complex structures lead to simple thinking. So simple structures are always required in order to put people in a position to discover something new. The wood shop, in this case, at your daughter's summer camp, is the simple structure, and the facilitator that made sure that your daughters didn't cut their fingers off. And then extending further to how people are involved, I think the role of leadership, whether it's a new idea or anything else, is you have to provide a partially painted canvas. You have to figure out which things do I or do we have a responsibility to decide ahead of time, not democratically, are the core things that are going to be a part of X. And then in what ways will we invite other people to complete the canvas with us, so that A, we can see if the idea is sticky, B, we can find out if people are really invested, and C, if it really works, we can have a lot of sense of shared ownership. But I'll stop there and see what other people think.
Okay, there's been a ton of chat. I'm going to try and draw some of the questions out. Milton, have we touched on anything you want to respond to before we do that? And we don't have audio from you, Milton.
Sorry. There we go. So I just put something in the chat about the independent project that was organized in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. High school students who self-organized themselves and were allowed to do so by their high school. It's a nice film that you can see there where the school actually did exactly what we're talking about. They gave students a chance to spend time. I saw there was a comment about where does the time come from. As seniors, they were able to spend time doing independent projects. And there is a history of independent projects. We should build on that and trying to help students, now that we've given them this wonderful set of tools on the internet to self-organize their learning, they can go much deeper.
So Milton, is there a role for mandatory or government-imposed visions of this, or does this kind of come out from the grassroots and expand based on popularity?
Hope you can hear me now. So, yeah, I think that we need much more flexibility for students and teachers at the grassroots. I wish that school boards would allow more time and more projects. I'm hoping that if we can just start with one semester and move it to 1 year, often the senior year in particular is something that's lost after the exams are, the SAT and the college applications are done. Make better use of time during the senior year. But I'm not optimistic about government trying to specify exactly what this vision should be. And in fact, there should be many, many different kinds of visions.
Okay, so I've been looking at the chat and I just can't do it. So Gordon, can I call on you to touch upon 1 or 2 things that have been comments that you have made? I'm going to call on a couple of people here because I think that'll be easier than me trying to sort through what's there. So Gordon, are you willing to take the microphone for a second?
So regarding what, Steve? This is Gordon.
Well, anything that you've made several comments in there, and I was trying to sort through them, and I thought maybe I'll just ask you to chime in with something you are interested in talking about at this point.
Well, I think that it comes down for me to a generation or two that we've lost that has those experiences where, as I wrote, the messy learning is okay to be messy, and so it's difficult for some parents to let that messiness occur in a formal setting such as a school. Growing up on a farm, there's all kinds of messy learning that occurs on a farm, and you're privileged to have those. But city folks, sometimes the structures or the fear and uncertainty and doubt of the community just doesn't allow kids to explore like they maybe used to, and therefore the parents are more controlling. But so the adults don't have experiences in that. So I'd be curious to see what Sam and Milton have to say.
Milton, you want to go first?
Yeah, if I could just mention quickly that we do have some new partners, perhaps unlikely, in some large federal agencies beyond the U.S. Department of Education. And they include NASA and the National Park Service, and of course I think you know the Library of Congress and their work with their digital libraries, also the Smithsonian. So these agencies have access to just some amazing authentic resources and experiences. I'll talk just briefly about the National Park Service myself. I'm glad that we're back opening the national parks now. But if you go to nps.gov/teachers, you will see a newly redesigned education portal for the kinds of experiences in nature and engagement with our most important historic places in our country that go far beyond what a history textbook can provide or a science textbook. So there are a number of investments that we've made that are now bearing some fruit to help out with this whole issue of how do we make the learning more authentic and more real world. And quickly for educators, there's a great program called Teacher Ranger Teacher, where teachers can spend a summer in a national park working as a seasonal park ranger, and they'll go back to their classrooms in the fall and bring back what they've learned from, we pick it, any one of our 400 national park sites. Great professional development.
So, Gordon, I think you're exactly right and on point. That was one of the main things that motivated this year that I spent in DC schools and this new book that was why I wanted to put a human face on the modern landscape of school choice, because parents in particular, if I think about the people I know in DC, right, so DC has more school choice than any city except New Orleans, and I think we know why New Orleans is number one. And lots of really smart, motivated people who have absolutely no idea how to choose a school for their kid. So these should be the folks that have the easiest time of this, and they have no idea for exactly the reasons that you pointed out. And it's actually the main reason that we did a year at Mission Hill. If you haven't seen the video series, please check it out. Was everybody has been to school, and for the last 100 years, most of us have been to schools that are disturbingly similar. Very few of us have been to or worked in a really great school, and almost none of us knows what a really great learning environment looks like and requires. So Mission Hill is a project that's designed to show people, because to your point, Gordon, we all have a lot of work to do to kind of to unlearn and then learn something new when it comes to this notion of school. And I think it's the biggest obstacle. As somebody whose primary work is dealing in, kind of story and communicating ideas, that's the biggest obstacle that I'm struggling with every day.
Chad, you're in the chat, and you've said something that resonated with people here about calibration year. Do you want to describe that quickly? If you're willing to take the microphone, you click on the talk button at the top left.
Is it working?
It is working.
Oh, great. Yeah, I've recently switched divisions and have fallen in with some great people and thinking about kind of on the class level, but also on the year level and school level, like what do you really need to do to find out what's going to work and be sustainable, and what can you kind of staff with people who are, quote unquote, true believers who are really willing to take some time, fail, and figure out what kind of learning is really going to pull in kids so that they find reasons to become more and more self-directed so that they get into kind of the flow of learning. And I've just been thinking about it lately as that, the calibration year. Like if we're going to break out of what we're doing as a system, it'll take a little bit of time, and that time needs to be protected so that it's not kind of skewered or corrupted or bent back to the arc of standardization.
So what would that calibration year look like?
Well, I think maybe you'd have a little bit of business as usual as you were planning what to do, but in a larger school setting, I would think you would consider, if you want to take what you're doing now as kind of a control group, I would hope people could consider, school within school programs or specialty centers or something where, a couple of different groups can put together what they think is going to be a compelling experience for kids and just plan and document the heck out of it, see what happens, and then be really honest about what produced kind of amazing work and learning for kids, and what was something interesting to try or clever to try, but didn't hit in the same way as those really rich, deep learning experiences. And then in year two, share out, what did work the most, what was best for learning. And I guess the part of that is also communicating, what is each team really looking for? And how does that connect to what people who maybe haven't tried this stuff before, how does it connect to what they have in their own experience so they can try learning and using some of the strategies and methods that come out of kind of an experiential year or an inquiry-based year.
So Chad, we're really reaching the end of our hour, and I want to ask very quickly. So I was an exchange student in high school. I spent a year in Brazil. But the statistics are really against that happening in the U.S. I think we get something like 20,000 students who come from other countries into the U.S., but fewer than 1,500 who actually leave the U.S. What does that tell us about our willingness to actually look at a model like that? Is that, are we capable of actually implementing that? What would have to happen?
Well, an awful lot, but also an awful little. I don't think the system is capable of doing that, but I know tons of people who are. And so hoping that they each in their own ways find ways to do that work and share it out and inspire others through social media and through connected education, but also, very locally get kids and parents talking and asking questions about why can't we have more of this, or why is this happening at one school or not another, and kind of work towards a parity and an equity of choice that isn't, stay in a division or leave a division, but which of these options in the division is really best for kids, for learning, for engagement.
Yeah, I stole that statistic from Iron. I think Ed Greger was the originator. I don't know who from Iron is in the room at this point, but yes, please give credit to Iron for that statistic. Milton, final comments before we close a conversation that could probably go on for hours, but we have a commitment to keeping it to an hour. Anything you'd like to say to sum up?
Hard to sum up, but I think we picked up a lot of threads of innovation right here, and I do believe that things are happening more quickly now than, believe it or not, if you look back 5 years ago. I sometimes say that 2010, in my view, was the first year of the 21st century in American education, and the disruption, as I said, is happening in higher education, and it will come to school. So we all just need to keep on keeping on and bringing together all these different authentic experiences for kids. And I think we haven't said much about after school and summer is the third semester, but in many ways. Some of the most creative learning that goes on for our students happens outside of the school day for many of them.
Sam, final thoughts?
Thank you, Steve, as always, and everybody else for joining. I read this great quote recently, which seems appropriate for this group, which is that democracy does not require that we all live in equality, but it does require that we share in a common life. And for such a tech-savvy group of people, I would urge us all to continue to use that as the filter.
Say the quote one more time, Sam.
It's a paraphrase, but democracy does not require that we all live in equality, but it does require that we share in a common life.
Okay, love it. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Milton. Thanks, everybody, for coming. That was really fun. Milton, thanks for working through your connections. I actually think you must have gone back home or something because somehow you got out of the noise of the Starbucks, and we appreciate it. Have a great night, everybody. Hope you have fun with Connected Educator Month. The recording of this will be up in about 10 minutes and lots more this week. Take care. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Recording, they can get the code. This is the actual code if you want to get a badge for this session.